Walmart bag. You don't hear about that every day. I talked to Rudy Giuliani about it earlier today, and he said, look, the president had nothing to do with that payment, did not direct that payment. And he said if he had authorized that payment, he would have wanted it to be made by check, not by cash. So, you know, that's the word from the president's legal team. Who knows who's telling the truth here? But there is one interesting detail, which is that Cohen only paid that digital consultant, that IT consultant, the $12,000 to $13,000. Even though the consultant was expecting to be paid $50,000, Cohen later, after the fact, according to the Journal's reporting, received a reimbursement from the Trump organization for $50,000. And that's why Rudy Giuliani is now saying that Cohen was a thief, that he stole money from the Trump organization because he was taking back as reimbursement more than he actually paid for that tech consultant. So it's a very, interesting black hole we just dug into.
This is just weird. The fact that we are all having this conversation, that I'm having it with the three of you, is a little bit surreal. What's stranger yet is that 12 hours ago, that story was the biggest story in America, and now it's 30 minutes into this show, and we're talking about it. Thank you to all of you, Philip Rucker, Barbara McQuaid, and Emily Jane Fox. Coming up, bitter gridlock in Washington as the shutdown is minutes away from entering day 28. More on that when the 11th hour continues. Welcome back. We're covering tonight's potentially game-changing report from BuzzFeed News. Again, that headline: President Trump directed his attorney to lie to Congress about the Moscow Tower project. The website citing two federal law enforcement officials familiar with the matter. This is all developing as the government shutdown over a border wall is stretching into its 28th day at the top of the hour. Today, President Trump hit back at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just one day after she threatened to cancel Trump's State of the Union address. He sent the speaker a one-page letter canceling her previously undisclosed flight to Afghanistan on a military plane because of the shutdown. He sent the letter roughly an hour before Pelosi and several other lawmakers were scheduled to leave on what's called a CODEL, a congressional delegation. With us for more on all of this, Sabrina Siddiqui, political reporter for The Guardian, and Tamara Keith, White House correspondent for NPR. Just another story that is particularly confusing today. But Sabrina, tell us what the response is here. The president seemed to be thinking that Nancy Pelosi had one up on him by kind of disinviting him to deliver the State of the Union address. So this is his response?
It absolutely is. And I think that the escalating feud between the president and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just reinforces that there's no end in sight when it comes to the shutdown. It's telling that after Speaker Pelosi suggested the president postpone his State of the Union, that the president was much more focused on retaliating against the House Speaker than he was in finding some sort of resolution. And all the while, you have roughly 800,000 federal workers who are either furloughed without pay or working without pay. And there's a very real concern among some aides whom I've spoken with on Capitol Hill that it's going to take perhaps some sort of disaster or emergency for the impact of the shutdown to truly be realized.
Interestingly enough, Tamara, of all the things that Donald Trump has done in the last couple of years, very little has a meaningful impact on his base of support. But for this, and we've actually got some new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist polling indicating that Donald Trump's support in general, in almost every category, including amongst Republicans, is down by significant numbers. Most respondents saying it's because of the shutdown.
Yeah, the shutdown is certainly weighing on his approval, and it's coming from some people who have been his most loyal supporters, including white men, suburban men, and also women without college degrees. Those are sort of key elements of the Trump base, and his numbers are slipping. There's been some erosion among those people. In addition to the broader public, he's having trouble with independents in a big way. but other polling, not our polling, but indicates that the public wants compromise. They want Republicans and Democrats and the president to come together somehow. But the definition of compromise, now that's another thing, because their idea of the public, generally speaking, people's idea of compromise is that the other side should come to them.
Right. And to that point, Sabrina, Donald Trump is finally seeing these cracks in his base. So what does he do to solidify that base of support? Compromise or stick to his guns on this one? As we recall, there was a compromise that was going to avoid a government shutdown, and Donald Trump was threatened by right-wing hosts that would affect his base.
Well, that's actually a key point that you raised, because it's actually the president having pulled back from that compromise, which would have averted a shutdown by funding the government and did not have money appropriated toward the construction of the wall, that Republicans in the Senate voted for, and they felt that the president, having changed his mind at the last minute and insisting on funding for the wall, that's what really backed them into a corner, because they're now on record having supported a bipartisan compromise. And so I think that the president, you know, as he looks at these polls, he's certainly been frustrated, but he blames the coverage more so than I think he's willing to take some sort of responsibility. But I do think he's going to look at these cracks within his base and realize his position is untenable. Now, is that going to push him closer to negotiating with Democrats? Or is it going to perhaps prompt him to revisit declaring a national emergency so he could leave it to the courts, say, I did everything I could, and then perhaps reopen the government and claim that, you know, he still eked out some sort of a victory here?
We saw a Trump campaign fundraising email. This is the Trump campaign, a letter signed or at least attributed to the president, saying the only reason Democrats and Nancy Pelosi want to reschedule my State of the Union address is because they know I will say what I've always said about our southern border, the truth. Americans demand the truth, so we need to make a clear statement and raise $1 million by midnight tonight, 20 minutes from now, to show your support for border security, the real security concern. Tamara, what is the president's next move? Because he has invested everything in suggesting that there is no compromise, no other solution for border security than his wall, in the face of entire opposition by the Democrats and growing opposition amongst Republicans.
What's not clear is if there is something maybe bubbling below the surface. We know that today Vice President Pence and Jared Kushner went and met with Mitch McConnell. In the past, with government shutdowns, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, has been a key element in resolving the shutdowns and fixing the, you know, finding a way out. An aide, White House aide, told me that there was nothing more they could report. The meeting lasted a little less than an hour. So unclear whether anything came out of that. It seems like maybe nothing really did come out of it, but the fact that they are sending emissaries up to the Hill at least indicates that the White House is looking for an out, which is more than we've seen.
That is a lot of qualification in your voice there, Tamara.
It's true.
Yeah. We will watch and see. It's 28 days we've been doing it. It's just about 28 days. We will continue until it's over. Sabrina Siddiqui and Tamara Keith, thank you both for joining me on a Thursday night. Coming up, the day's news impact on the president's legacy. Presidential historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin joins me next when the 11th hour continues.
It's small. It's addictive. It is unbecoming a president of the United States, but it is unfortunately a daily occurrence.
This is the president essentially being a man baby all over again.
Trump's move to cancel Pelosi's trip just minutes before she and others were set to leave to visit troops in a war zone signals a new level of weaponizing politics. Of course, this is all happening as nearly 800,000 federal employees and other contractors are without paychecks and forced to decide what bills, if any, are paid. And now, these latest significant developments in the ongoing Russia investigation. With me now, Doris Kearns-Goodwin, presidential historian and author. She has written some of the best books around, but bestsellers about both Roosevelts, about the Kennedys, about LBJ and Lincoln. Her latest work is Leadership in Turbulent Times, and it has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 17 weeks. Doris, the things that have been going on Capitol Hill between Nancy Pelosi suggesting that Donald Trump either delay the State of the Union address until after the shutdown, or submit it as a letter, or deliver it from his office, and the president canceling Nancy Pelosi's trip on a military aircraft to Afghanistan, both exist within the historic norms and authority of both of their offices.
Yeah, I think this will be a moment that history will remember as one of those never-ending moments in the struggle between the executive and the legislature. I mean, of course, the president has the power as commander-in-chief to decide that she cannot use a military transport. He can't really cancel her trip. He admitted she could take a commercial plane if she wanted to, but essentially canceling the trip. And of course, she has the power as speaker to say that a joint session of Congress can only be started by a resolution by both houses to invite him to speak. That doesn't mean that he couldn't deliver it in writing. It doesn't mean he couldn't speak from the Oval Office. But somehow this shutdown has become a pawn in this struggle between the executive and the legislature. I mean, I think in many ways Nancy Pelosi had the right to say, you know, you can't come to Congress, we have to invite you, but of course you can deliver it, as I say, from the Oval Office. In the old days, the president, George Washington, was the first person who delivered it in person. But then after that, Thomas Jefferson decided it was too much like a king. He also knew that he wasn't a great speaker and he was a great writer, so better to deliver it in writing. It was only when Woodrow Wilson then, they all started just delivering it in writing, but then Woodrow Wilson wanted to exert the power of the presidency against Congress, so he said, I'm going in person. And Teddy Roosevelt thought, why didn't I think of that beforehand? And so it does give the president power when they're there in person. But it is a struggle between the two of them right now, and it started with the midterms. There had been a time when the president, for the first 2 years, had the president and the Congress and lots of influence in the Supreme Court. And now you're seeing that balance shifting, I think, with this struggle between the two of them.
You said something really interesting about Woodrow Wilson wanting to assert the authority of the presidency by delivering this speech at Congress. That is a fight writ large that is going on today. It's been going on for a few presidencies, but right now we have a president who is basking in an expansion of executive authority, and we've been hearing testimony about this with the new Attorney General nominee, and we have a Speaker of the House who reminds everybody that it is the first branch mentioned in the Constitution, and implies that the legislative branch should have supremacy. So in addition to the political fight that's going on, there's a bit of a historic fight that is also being shown here.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we saw glimmers of that when the midterms happened, and you began to see a shift in more power to the Congress. But I think the really interesting thing about the shutdown right now is that for decades we've been seeing a decreasing trust in government. And government's like that thing out there. But I think what people are feeling now is the government workers are part of their everyday lives. So when history looks back at this moment, they already may see that this was a moment when people began to see